My name is Dick Morrill, and I'm from the Boston area, and very much from the New York area now, have been since I was married quite a few years ago. And my background, as far as art is concerned, began with the Cambridge School of Design on the GI Bill right after World War II. It went on from there to New York City, but while I was still in Boston, there are several memorable things that I've carried with me all of these years that might be mentioned. One being that when I used to pass the Bush-Reisinger Museum at Harvard every day, several times a day in fact. A favorite museum of mine. It's a marvelous, then smallish museum. It's grown since, I understand. But one day I happened in, and of all things, there was an exhibition of a painter by the name of Max Beckmann, who had been one of the important founders of the German Expressionist movement. When Hitler came along, he, like so many other creative people in Germany, fled to other parts of the world, mainly Britain and the United States, and survived and have remained here and been quite successful, not only as exhibiting painters, but as educators at various universities. One could mention some of the architects, some of the composers, as well as the painters and sculptors. At any rate, that had a profound effect on me, these paintings. I remember going back to school and just raving about it, and getting my fellow students to get down and take a look at Max Beckmann, and I suspect they all got something out of it. At the same time in Boston, there was a school of painters called the Boston School of Expressionists, and they were equally influential in my life. However, getting on with my history, after graduation, and my wife and I moved to New York, and I did freelance for a few years as an illustrator on a pretty entrance-level playing field, mainly men's adventure magazines, that kind of thing. One surprising and rather shocking thing I discovered right away, which quite frankly disenchanted me as an illustrator for life. I was thinking of illustration, unfortunately, essentially as a matter of making a living. But when I did discover that art directors wanted basically to see every illustration that one delivered as in the same style as all of the other illustrations that one had delivered, that meant that you kind of had to go through life repeating yourself, I felt. Well, that apparently is no problem for most people, but by God, it was for me. I just hate the idea with sitting down and having to imitate myself. So I began to spend more and more of my free time, such as it was, doing my own thing, and something I suppose you might refer to as entrance expressionism. And as far as the professional life is concerned, I ceased pretty much to do illustration. I more and more spent time at the easel. However, during the working day, I had a clock to punch at a graphic design studio, which also included quite a number of first-rank illustrators, and real nice gals and guys, you know. And later on, they would become even closer colleagues of mine, but at that time, I was apparently successful in picking up assignments for them, delivering assignments, delivering the sketches for approval, and then finishes. Everyone seemed quite happy, and my boss included. Well, at one point, these illustrators, a number of them got together and kind of wanted to talk me into going on my own. Well, I was about to become a capitalist without capital, but I remember borrowing $300 from my father-in-law, and that was it. It was enough for the first month's rent and, you know, the money to the telephone company and so forth, and some stationery. The prices were less in those days. I went on to represent, as I say, this number of people in publishing. That is to say, everything from slick magazines through textbooks, book jackets, etc. And also in the general advertising field, which could be anything from a space magazine, you know, space newspaper and magazine advertising, billboards, that kind of thing. All of which was kind of fun, and I was kind of happy I didn't have to do it myself, because I began to look more and more on it as being less creative and more labor. And that's probably an unfair assessment of it, because I'm really only speaking of myself when I say that. And anyway, I then was approached. I had an exhibition of sculpture uptown. Very fortunate to have that, and it was fairly successful. And I received a phone call subsequently from a man who was the owner of an art school. There were several vocational art schools still remaining that have not become wings of academe, and were simply there to train young people into the profession and as professionals. I enjoyed the teaching, I must say, and I eventually hooked up with an important person in the state university system, through whom I was able to have approved a number of ideas for overseas programs during the summer, as well as during the winterim holiday, that is, in the month of January, essentially. Things developed on quite nicely and continued. I was a part-time businessman, a part-time painter, and a part-time teacher, all of which I enjoyed. Probably the least of all being the businessman, but again, children were on the way, food had to be put on the table. I began to read and think and even meet a few of the Boston Expressionists. For instance, Jack Levine, Karl Zerbe, another German refugee from Hitler, and Hyman Bloom. In addition, I became aware of the paintings of Oskar Kokoschka, of Otto Dix, and of George Grosz. Again, revelations. The later in my teaching career, I shouldn't admit this, I had the opportunity of visiting a lot of places abroad, particularly in that I did take the family one year and we did move to London, and where I was cementing relationships with a competitor in London, and with the notion of complementing one another across the big pond. And it did work out quite well. I had some British artists, and the London office had some American artists, and it worked very well. At the same time, the programs which were in London, in rural England, on the continent, and mainly during the winter and during January, going to all sunny, warm places, the Soviet Union, which, by the way, one January, the mercury got finally, the last few days, above 40 below zero, which gives you an indication of what the weather was like. Now, as far as my own work is concerned, people refer to me as an expressionist, and I guess I am, because I've always been very happy to be free and express myself in naughty ways perhaps as a child and in other ways as an adult. At any rate, I do like the idea. The word expressionism, by the way, has its own definition pretty much in its name. It is really to freely express yourself. However, in order to do this, it's very important to first, the ABCs, learn, 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 human anatomy, drawing, painting techniques, one can go on and on, history of art and so forth. And then cut off and do your own thing. And feel free. By the way, I think if there's a definition of another definition of expressionism, it would be to break all the rules that you can. And if you can get away with it, you're successful. And you'll find a lot of repainting goes on among expressionists. And to this day, it's developed, in my own case, I think, fairly successfully. And at least I'm generally fairly happy with what I do. But as I look back at things done a few months ago, I say, oh my heavens, you know, how infantile. Now, my own way of working is pretty much taking the paint and going directly onto the canvas. And prior to that, of course, preparing the canvas. The preparation is generally to take the raw canvas, stretch it, and take out an acrylic gesso or a regular standard gesso, it doesn't matter really, and cover the canvas with that and frequently mix it with various grades of sand, for instance. Also with fabric. I'm particularly happy with the use of cheesecloth, as a matter of fact. But anything will do. You can take rice paper or any paper or the newspaper. As long as it's isolated from oxygen, it's going to remain permanent. So you can use anything, really. And then go in directly into painting. And I paint in the first and main stage of the painting with acrylic and with some use of dry charcoal too when I want to. Certain variations and so forth. It's nice to mix up, and other things as well. It's particularly in contemporary art, you can do pretty much what you want to do, providing the result works. And works can mean a lot of things, which, God, if I wanted to go into now, it would take a month of Sundays. And then the rest of it is pretty much of a matter of finding a stopping point. But one thing I'd like to also mention that's, I think, important, particularly to young artists, even if you think of yourself an expressionist and begin with a scribble, which is an okay way to begin, but still you should have the germ, at least the germ of an idea between your ears to proceed with, rather than kind of, you know, futzing around blindly. And I think that probably pretty much explains it.